Hello and welcome. For those listening, I'm Chloe Hamman, Director of People Science at Culturamp, and I'm about to kick off a conversation with two creative CEOs and co-founders. Our very own Didier Elzinga, CEO at Culturamp. Didier, great to see you.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you, Chloe.
And Michael Acton Smith, co-CEO at Calm, one of my favorite meditation apps and a favorite amongst millions of others. Michael, great to have you join us.
Great to be here. Nice to meet you guys.
And did you note that we're creative CEOs?
I like that. That was a nice touch. Yes.
It's very true. So I'd like to set the tone by saying that this is a very relaxed and down-to-earth conversation all about well-being and emotional intelligence. The intention for those listening is to deep dive into the importance of well-being on culture and performance at an individual, team, and C-suite level. So taking into consideration that we're going through unprecedented times, I thought I'd like to get straight into it and start off by asking you both, as business leaders, how are you balancing the pressure of being a lead decision maker and looking after your own well-being? And Michael, I might start with you.
Yes, you're right. These are unprecedented times. There isn't really a playbook to figure out how to work or think or play during these times. But I personally love work, and I've never kind of subscribed to the view of work-life balance. I see it as a work-life blend. And so during these times, I found myself thinking and working in different ways. I actually like the extra space and time. I haven't been in a meeting room for a long time, apart from Zoom, obviously. Haven't been tapped on the shoulder or interrupted from a chain of thought. So it's been pretty fascinating. But the downside of that is you don't have the normal triggers to stop working. And I've definitely found myself kind of watching a film at 1 a.m, firing off emails and going, whoa, hang on a minute. That's probably too much. So trying to be mindful, trying to be a bit thoughtful, but on balance have found it a fascinating new way to work. And it's still a work in progress. And so, yeah, learning every day.
Do you have kids, Michael?
I do. I have a wonderful little 2-year-old daughter.
Oh, wow.
And she's amazing. She helps me on some of my Zoom calls. So it's definitely obviously harder for folks that are caring for others, and harder for folks that are in environments without outside space. So it is a pretty broad spectrum. And yeah, we're all just doing our best, and as I say, trying to figure it out day by day.
Yeah,
and you've got kids as well.
I do. Yeah, I was actually just thinking as you were reflecting on it, like I feel pretty fortunate as well. And I think I'm glad you said the space thing, because I think it's like, if you have access to the outside, so I live in St Kilda in Melbourne, so I can get to the beach in about 5 minutes running. And that's huge. If I didn't have that, I don't think I'd be coping quite so well. But having that opportunity to get out, and then having older kids who are more self-driven, like they're now back at school as of two weeks ago, but having homeschooling, my 2 boys are 13 and 10, so they're fairly self-directed, but as they get younger, it gets harder and harder. And I saw somebody did a tweet that I loved, which was, you're not working from home, you're at home during a crisis trying to work. There is a difference. I think that there's a lot of struggle, but similar to you, I kind of feel like on the plus side, there is a lot more flexibility because of being at home and having the meetings and go, oh, I've got an hour, I'm going to go for a run, or I'm going to go sit outside, or I'm going to just do something for myself, which is much harder to do when you're in the office, I find. But the other side is it's really hard not to work a lot. Like I actually went for a run at 5 o'clock and I was feeling guilty because there was a bunch of things that I should have been doing. And then I'm like, I've been going since 7. I've actually done 12 hours already today. I didn't stop for lunch. So like, that's actually enough. I shouldn't be thinking that I can get 16 hours worth of work done, because that's not sustainable. And we live on Zoom.
It's so true. We wanted to take the temperature of our team and see how everyone was feeling. And we did a Culturamp survey recently about working from home. And we were amazed to hear, I think it was something like 97% of the team felt they were more productive working from home, which just blew us away. There is a small proportion that are finding it very difficult, and I think it's extremely important to find out who those folks are, because they might not be putting their hand up. But if you'd have said this to me before Corona hit, will Calm prosper and be more productive completely remote, I'd have thought you were mad. But I think this has been a real kind of wake up call. There are definitely obviously pros and cons to being in an office and being remotely, working remotely. But so far it's from a work perspective, purely, it's been a net positive for the company.
I was actually just looking at our benchmark data on that question, Michael, and our benchmark is 80%. So 80% of people globally, employees, believe they are more productive when working remotely at home. And just as you both were talking, I was thinking about that kind of paradox between feeling super productive, but then maybe not being able to switch off. And again, our data says that people feel they can actually get most of their work done during their normal work hours. It's 60%, but our normal benchmark is 45. So right now that's increased. But then the downside is, I think it's only around 54% believe they can actually effectively switch off from work and make time for rest, which is what you were talking about around watching a movie at 1 a.m. and then sending an email. Is you're definitely not the only one. Half of employees out there are feeling that way. So,
yeah. And I think we're all just trying to figure this out together. What are the new systems and triggers we can put in place to help us transition from work to non-work when we are in just one single environment? I think I read somewhere that someone has a different pair of socks depending on whether he's in work mode or non-work mode, and I'm sure everyone is starting to figure out their own little hacks.
I saw a great picture of that where somebody was talking about routines to get into work and how you can not fool your mind, but train your mind. And they had a picture of someone preparing, and so he's standing in his bathroom with his suit on, holding his briefcase on with the iPhones in, holding onto the rail as if he's on the subway.
For an hour and a half, getting jostled around. Yeah.
Rituals are important though, I think, in terms of creating space. And I think that's probably the point, which is that we don't have boundaries right now. It's how much that commute was used to switch modes.
Yep. I think there's a lot we can learn from companies that have always been distributed and remote. Automatic is a great example. Matt Mullenweg talks about this, and they have over 1,000 employees. They don't describe themselves as remote. They say they have a distributed workforce, and so they've had years to kind of figure all this out: what equipment they need, what processes, and the rest of us are trying to learn on the fly. There's a great book by the guys from Basecamp, called Remote, that I found really useful. So we're kind of sponges at the moment, trying to figure out how best to do this. And
InVision and GitLab are also at that sort of 1,000 people, fully distributed. Amazing.
What proportion of your workforce was remote before this happened?
About less than 10%. So we were Melbourne, San Francisco, New York, London. Majority of the people were in one of those 4 offices.
Got it. So that's pretty interesting. So you have a pretty distributed team anyway. You obviously, I imagine, put a lot of things in place to work through different time zones. And
yes, although we still had an office culture rather than a distributed culture. So there's learnings for us on this as well. Hugely, not least of which, do we really need a multi-million-dollar lease in each of those cities?
A great question. We're asking ourselves the same questions.
Yeah.
All right. So one of the next questions I had, and I might get you to start with as well, Michael, is around, as you were talking, I can tell that you obviously carry a lot of emotional intelligence in how you think about these problems and how you think about your own well-being. How do you lead with emotional intelligence, and how can leaders at all levels kind of incorporate a sense of EQ or emotional intelligence into the work environment, be that, I guess, remote or in the workplace?
Yeah, we've always valued it. I think it's extremely important in a workplace. We made it one of our 8 core values. So we screen for it during our interviewing process. And I think it's important for all companies. It's particularly important for a company like Calm, which has meditation and mindfulness at its core. So, I don't think it's been that highly valued in Silicon Valley traditionally. I think that is starting to change. But yeah, we view it as important, if not more in some occasions than traditional raw IQ. I think the ability to empathize with your team, the ability to build strong relationships and be thoughtful about how you go about it. Communication is so important. And these things all interconnected with high EQ. So yeah, it's a very important part of how we do business.
Yeah. And do you have, say, like a story or a specific example of where you go, actually, that's a really good example of someone showing it at like a leader level, maybe where it wasn't expected, or something that, especially given it's a value, one of your maybe favorite stories around it?
Good question.
Probably put you on the spot here.
Right on the spot. Let me have a good think about that. I think we do value communication a lot, written communication, and I think we're going to value that even more in the age of remote working. And something I've heard quite a bit from remote teams, Matt Mullenweg talks about this idea of API, not the traditional API, but assume positive intent. And it's so easy in messaging and Slack and text and emails to just get the wrong end of the stick. And if you give people the benefit of the doubt, your colleagues 99 times out of 100, when they're sending you a message, that they're not meaning to be passive aggressive. They're not trying to make you feel bad, but it's very easy for the human brain to tripwire and think that. So if you come from a default position of just assuming positive intent in any messaging, I think that helps smooth a lot of the kind of bumpy edges of work life. So there are probably many examples I could give of that happening in the business, but yeah, that's a kind of general overview of it.
What's your preferred way of screening for that? What do you look for? Do you use a psychometric test, or do you have preferred questions that you ask, or how do you look for EQ?
Yeah, we don't do any kind of psychometric testing like that. We do have some favorite questions that we ask. One is talk about a time that you failed at work, something that went wrong. And it's very interesting to see how people frame that. Do they blame other people? Do they take responsibility? So I think that's one area we look. And we look at the whole interview process. How do they treat, how does the candidate treat the receptionist when they come into the office? How easy and thoughtful are they in messaging with the recruitment team? All the little softer small talk stuff that might normally just be ignored, we factor into the building the bigger picture.
Nice.
Do you is it one of your values? Is it something you screen for in recruiting?
We don't have EQ as an explicit value, although some of our values tie into it nicely. So our first value is have the courage to be vulnerable. And so that concept of emotional vulnerability and both being able to provide it, but also to create space for it, is, same thing, different language. And then also amplify others is another one of our values. And learn faster through feedback is the other, and trust people to make decisions is the fourth. So all of them actually kind of hub out of a concept of EQ. Yeah. And I think it's, from a leadership point of view, I think, like, even particularly given what we've just gone through, it's become so much more important, like in a crisis. Like, one of the things that I found myself saying to a lot of people is the first thing, now that we're all distributed, is leaders don't have to be perfect. They just have to show up. Like, your people, and we're seeing this in the political environment as well. Like, we need to see the people that are expected to be leading us, and we need to hear what they're thinking and what they're worried about. And we need to see how they're processing the world. And, internally we talk about, you need to absorb fear as a leader, because people have a lot of fear, and you need to be able to help them process that and figure out, okay, given all of that, what can we control? What can't we? What can we focus on? What are the opportunities? And then on the other side, I think we're also seeing a need for people to see their leaders as human. And particularly given we're all on Zoom, like, people are sitting at home, and this probably leads into some of the mental fitness stuff that hopefully you'll talk a little bit about too, which is they're at home, struggling to teach their kids, struggling to get work done, feeling rubbish, worried that they're going to get coronavirus, and then thinking that they're the only one that's struggling. And then they see someone on screen and go, oh, that person's, everything's right. And so when a leader gets up and goes, no, I'm struggling too, and I have these problems. And on a bad day, I feel like this. People are like, oh, okay, it's okay to be actually human. And so I think those two sides of both being willing to admit that we all have to make mistakes and that we can do those openly and process that stuff. But at the same time, we're absorbing fear, not magnifying it. For me, really, really important.
Yeah, I agree with all that. We're big fans of Brené Brown at Calm and Vulnerability. And to your point about communication, this was another thing that came up from our second Culture Amp survey we did. I think it was generally very positive, but some of the areas for us to improve as a leadership team was to be better communicators. And we recently brought on a fantastic CTO, Will, came from Stripe. And we're all learning from him. He's an incredible, very thoughtful, very mindful communicator. And we realized that we just needed to be better letting the team know what was going on, the good and the bad, and doing it in different ways. Q&A sessions, email communication, very light touch stuff on Slack. It's I think we're definitely getting better in that area because it's extremely important.
I might lean into what you were saying before, Didier, about sort of showing up as being human. And we're talking about the importance of well-being. So when you learn, I guess, about the importance of taking care of yourself, and if you have something or you don't mind sharing, is there some moments where you found it particularly challenging to look after yourself?
Yes. I think going back to what we were talking about earlier, there's always, particularly in this environment, and maybe more so like 6 to 8 weeks ago, there's incredible amount of uncertainty. And so being able to sit with that uncertainty, and there's no possible way you can do all the things that you would like to do. So at a certain point, you just have to draw a line and go, I'm going to bed now. I can't keep going, and then I'm going to get up and do it all again tomorrow. And so, I think actually it was your quote, Chloe, in our internal wellbeing guide that I sometimes think about, which is, meditation is preparation for the worst day of your life.
Yeah.
And this idea that, yes, if you're in a really bad environment, start meditating, be great. But really it's practice that you have to be investing in. So when that moment comes, you know how to process it, and you have these things to not protect you, but to help you through it. And so for me, that's actually been a big thing of like, what are the habits that I have that I can fall back on when I'm struggling? Like whether it's because I'm struggling energetically or I'm struggling to, I think as humans, we're so good at looking linearly that tomorrow will look largely the same as today, maybe a little different. And then when we're forced to confront that tomorrow could look massively different and we just don't know, so much just shuts down. And I think as a leader, that's really hard when you're trying to navigate that, because people want some certainty. Like I can't give you certainty because I don't know which is going, but I have to give you something. And so how do you calm yourself? And so for me, running's one that's really helpful, primarily outside and without headphones, because I just find that kind of calms me down. And then, the same breathing and meditation to ground myself. And it's not the actual process itself, but it's the consistent application of it that I think I notice makes a difference and just gives you more resilience and more ability to bounce back, and let things go, not dwell more. I mean, I still get upset, but I'm upset for less time when I'm looking after myself.
Yeah.
What about you, Michael? How do you?
Yeah. Well, I think I completely agree with your first point that there is so much uncertainty and craziness in the world right now, and we can't fix everything. And I like the stoic view of the world that worry about the things you can impact, because there's enough of that. And if you worry about everything else that you can't change, you're just constantly going to be in turmoil and for yourself and those around you. So for me, I think, I've been able to give more time to my kind of health and wellness during this period. So there's 4 areas that I think are important to focus on. One is physical health, doing exercise. One is mental health, meditation and so forth. One is nutrition, what we put in our bodies, extremely important. And the fourth one is sleep, incredibly important, which so many of us just ignore and compress to as little as we can. But so many studies now are showing how incredibly valuable sleep is to every aspect of our life.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
So I preach all this. I don't manage to do it perfectly, but I'm definitely more conscious and thoughtful about it. And one of the things I've loved about lockdown is not setting an alarm clock in the morning. So I'm quite fortunate, as I say, in that my actual Zoom day doesn't begin until about 4 p.m. When San Francisco wakes up. There's a lot to do before then, but I don't set an alarm, so my body wakes up when it's ready to wake up, and it just has such a different impact on my mood and my creativity and my energy levels. And I think for years we've just been artificially compressing the amount of sleep our bodies actually need.
Yeah, able to work like that.
When your 2-year-old decides that it's time for you to wake up.
Once again, the theory is great. The reality, when you have a 2-year-old, screaming is not.
I think it was Mark Andreessen that had a great quote where he said, being a startup CEO is you sleep like a baby. You wake up every couple of hours crying. We forget what the kids are actually like.
So true.
Sorry, Chloe.
No, I was just going to say, Michael, you're kind of living the life of a true creative artist that way. If you look at the kind of the daily schedules of some of the great artists, they had sleep schedules similar where they just slept and then woke up when they did, and they worked everything else around it. So not quite that, but it's...
I'm actually the opposite in the sense that I like the mornings, and I have to get up because of the Australian-US overlap. But what I found is that I force myself to get up early every morning. So it's either 5 or 6, 5 in summer and 6 in winter. Because just too depressing to have it dark for too long. And then the discipline's on the other side. So making sure I go to sleep with enough windows. And I'm a believer in the 90-minute model of sort of roughly 90-minute sleep cycles. And so what I found is that it's 6, 7.5 or 9 hours is my kind of optimum period. And so during the week, I optimize for 7.5. And now that I'm older, on a Friday or a Saturday, rather than going to a bar, I'm like 9 hours sleep tonight. That's my goal. But it just helps me in my head go, all right, I have to go to bed now. Otherwise, I'm not going to get, to your point, the sleep that I need. And it makes such a difference.
And I think the fascinating thing about sleep is we're all wired a little bit differently. And the key is not forcing yourself to do what you think you should be doing. It's to do what's right for your body. Let your body tell you. Some people perform and are completely normal on 6 or 7 hours sleep. It's some even lower. There's a gene where I think Ronald Reagan had it and Margaret Thatcher, where they could be successful on like 4 hours sleep a night. But yeah, it's finding what works for you. And
although I'm always, it's like, all the research on people that suffer from sleep disorders, and the difference between what they think they sleep and what they actually do is quite large. Whereas, they self-report this and they're actually sleeping more than that. And I'm always skeptical when it's a CEO or a president who's able to survive on 3 hours sleep. I'm like, I don't know about that. Although I do remember Margaret Thatcher was pretty full on.
Yeah. And I think they also needed a nap in the afternoon. So yeah, I find sleep fascinating. There's a great book by Matthew Walker called Why We Sleep, which just has a lot of very sort of recent science.
Have you read The Rebuttal of the Book and The Rebuttal of the Rebuttal?
I have. I've not read The Rebuttal of the Rebuttal. I saw The Rebuttal and I'm looking forward to reading The Rebuttal of that.
Yeah, it's a classic Hacker News type stuff.
Love it.
Right. Michael, I might turn the spotlight on you for a minute. You started to talk about sort of sleep and the importance of the 4 areas. And I've been hearing a lot about the concept of mental fitness. So when you think about mental fitness, how do you define it? And what does it look or feel like to be mentally fit?
Well, Calm started life as a meditation app. And, that is still at the heart of what we do. But we're much, much broader than that now. And meditation is just one part of living a happy and a healthy life. So we see, mental health has been growing in importance. It used to be very stigmatized a few years ago, and that is changing. But we see mental fitness sort of similar to physical fitness. Nike has built a $100 billion business and surfed the wave of the importance of physical health. And we want Calm to do the same for mental fitness. And it's everything from meditation and mindfulness through sleep to building up greater resilience, to improving your relationships. There's an awful lot to it. It's using Calm is the equivalent for your mind as going to the gym is for your body. It's kind of proactive rather than reactive for your health. So that's kind of some ways of thinking about it. And the last thing I'll say is that, I think we built an incredible audience. At the moment, we have about 80 million downloads of Calm. But that's barely 1% of the world. And 7.5 billion people have a mind, and we want to reach everybody. So if we're going to do that, I think we need to be very thoughtful and careful of how we frame what we're doing, and describing Calm and building a brand around this sort of quite positive concept of mental fitness felt a better way of framing than talking about mental health, which is still part of what we do, but it's kind of it's the penny still hasn't dropped for a lot of people on that aspect. So yeah, hope that made sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes you talk about the concept of, say, well-being, and in some areas, well-being is seen as the absence of, say, mental illness or stress, but it's not exactly that. It's the positive side. So it's talking about, yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, thinking about being, I guess, mentally fit in the workplace, and thinking about, you said you don't sort of necessarily believe in balance between work-life balance, but thinking about the right balance between stress and challenge, which I think is part of, being well and being mentally fit in the workplace. So how do you think about finding that, and I guess that area where people are challenged to the right extent but aren't burning themselves out or sacrificing their well-being or their mental fitness?
Yeah, it's an important question. Stress is not by itself bad. There's eustress, which is healthy stress. It's what motivates us and pushes us forward. The problem is when it becomes chronic, and we're locked in this state of our bodies being in a fight or flight mode, pumped with cortisol and adrenaline, where the other functions that are important to being a human being get sidelined, from cells being repaired or, digestion, or on and on and on. So I think it's very important for managers and leaders of companies to keep an eye on the stress levels and the workloads of their teams, and be conscious of it, and have systems in place during one-to-ones to try and pick up on it. But I think it's important for the individuals as well to understand themselves and be aware when they are working too much, or when it's going from that high energy, exciting work to just damaging their health, and they start getting closer to kind of burnout and serious illness. So yeah, there's no kind of easy silver bullets here. It's about knowing oneself, and that's why meditation and mindfulness are so valuable, because it helps us pause and check in with ourselves and keep an eye on ourselves and be more aware. And so yeah, that's another reason why it's a valuable practice.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think we ask, in our wellbeing questions, yes, we ask about people feeling whether they believe the stress they're experiencing is manageable, and like I said, whether they can switch off. But in the same, I guess, survey, or the same step, we ask whether they find the pace of work energizing and when they feel what they're doing is worthwhile. So trying to get at both aspects, and even asking about boredom. So we don't want to just ask about stress, you want to ask about boredom and pace and energy as well. So
yep.
Yeah.
Very true.
So Didier, I might get into, while we're talking about wellbeing at work, I might start getting into more the business impact of wellbeing. So what impact does it have not being in the right mindset when it comes to, I guess, quality of decisions? And as a leader, how does it impact your company?
So I think increasingly the value that we're creating in the businesses that we're in comes from the head, not the hands. So something that I often quote when I'm talking about culture amp is this idea that back in 1938, Henry Ford said, "Why is it when all I want is a pair of hands attached?" why is it when all I want is a pair of hands, I get a brain attached? Get the quote right. So that was the 1938 Taylorism model of work. And increasingly, what people are doing at Calm, or what people are doing at Culture Amp, or what people are doing at many of the companies around the world, is they're having to solve cognitively difficult problems. They're having to create, they're having to be innovative, they're having to do these things. And even roles that we might think of as being like more, blue collar type work are still increasingly cognitively loaded and difficult. And so in those environments, the mindset's where the value's coming from. Like the mindset, the mental fitness, if you will, that people have is creating the value that organizations are built upon. And so I think it's, fundamentally important as a starting point. And then going back to what we were talking about at the beginning around the value of like EQ and the value of the ability to interrelate with other people. So much of that comes down to what mindset are you in when you receive that information? And are you someone that's going to, because you're stressed, react in a way that creates the other person to get more stressed and create these little ripples through the organization? Or are you going to be the person that absorbs that fear and helps that person calm down and focus on what needs to be solved, and both of you move forward? So I think it's like fundamentally important in so much of the way we create value in organizations today, and not particularly well understood. So, there's lots of good research, there's decades worth of good research, but organizations are still, it's only probably 10 years ago, if you'd walked in and said some of the stuff that you were talking about, Michael, people would have thought that you'd just come off an ashram and, it was like so not the normal course. And now people are sitting there going, no, it is. And you go to professional sports teams and you go to, high performing organizations, and this is just completely normal. So I think we're seeing that trend towards people realizing that fitness is fundamentally important. And at the same time, mental well-being is such an important issue that we're also realizing in the workplace we have a duty of care to. So, 10, 20 years ago, I hope no one in my organization suffers from a mental illness because I don't know what to do. Whereas now people, like, everybody is dealing with something, and we've got to destigmatize it, and we've got to be here to support them. And it's not terminal. It's something that we can support people and we can work with, and hopefully work can be a positive influence, not a bad influence. And so I think both of those are reasons why this is so important. It's increasingly the way we create value and the way we destroy it, both personally and organizationally.
Agreed.
Yeah. Anything to add on that, Michael, when you're talking to organizations about the business side of even from a return on investment point of view?
Yeah, lots to add. I could talk about this for hours, so I'll keep it trim. I think, one area, to be blunt, is what drives business is kind of the bottom line and shareholder return, like it or not, that's business. And I think it's pretty obvious that there is a positive return by bringing in place mental health programs at work, because huge amounts of money are lost by employees taking time off because they are stressed or ill from something related to work. So that's one piece. But more importantly than that, the second one is just having a mentally strong, mentally healthy workforce just improves relationships at work. It improves resilience and creativity and all the other things that go to creating a great workplace. And the third piece is I just think there is a greater responsibility of businesses to not just look after their communities and to give back to those that help make their business successful, but to support and look after and nurture their teams. And I think making sure your workforce if it's hard to figure out exactly what the ROI on that is. So those are kind of three sort of ways we think about it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I imagine it's not the first time you've been asked that as well. So
no, we think about it a lot. And I think it's so wonderful what's happening at the moment, where this is becoming a topic and it's no longer just seen as kind of counterculture or weird.
I agree. I think it was well over 10 years ago, I was working in a consulting, and I suggested that it was psychometrics, and I suggested they should look into employee well-being, and I got told, yeah, good luck with that. So whereas now it's definitely don't get that response. So
there was a great chart I saw recently that showed the number of job adverts that mentioned mental health, mental well-being programs within their sort of promotion of what that workplace was like. And it was this flat line for years. And then in last 2 years, 2.5 years, just hockey stick like you wouldn't believe. And it's almost now becoming table stakes. You know, employees are asking about it in interviews. They're joining companies because this is one of the things they look for. So I just think that's a very positive change for the world.
Excellent. All right, so we're starting to run out of time, so I might start to wrap up with the last questions. And I think we're understanding that there's a lot of, I guess, a lot of unknowns right now, and it's going to be an ongoing challenge for leaders, and especially for you. So what advice do you have, I guess, for leaders to ask for help, or how do you get support if you are a leader? And then I've got one more after that. Didier, do you want to go first?
I think one thing I've always had, which has been hugely valuable, is as a CEO of a startup company, there are other CEO founders of startups, and that's an incredible self-help group. And through this crisis particularly, you know, very quickly WhatsApp groups were formed, and people that I kind of knew, but maybe I'd only spoken to once or twice in the previous year, I was talking to every day. And I think we all look to each other because we're like, all right, as you said at the start, Michael, we don't have playbooks for this. Like, what are you doing? And what we all quickly realized was there was some useful tactical stuff, but most of what we were getting was just going, all right, you're struggling like me. Good. Okay. It's not just me. How are you dealing with that? Who are you talking to? So I think that's been a big part, is finding people that you can share that with and be vulnerable with. Basically, that's what it came down to. Who could you sit down and go, I'm worried about this. I don't know what I'm doing. What are you doing? And they're like, oh, we're doing this, we've done that. And what blew me away was the level of trust and people's willingness to go, hey, don't share it broadly, but this is what we did here. Take a look at it. And you're like, oh, cool. That's really, really, really helpful. And yeah, just the affirmations from that. So that's probably my number one, which is if you are in that role, you need to find people out there, and you'll be surprised how willing people are to help. Even people that are 5 to 10 years ahead of where you may be. If you pick up the phone or WhatsApp them or email them or whatever, most people I know will find time for you. That been the same for you, Michael?
Very, very much so. Yeah, I'm very fortunate to have a great network of friends that many run their own businesses. And yeah, you don't always want to go to your board and share your vulnerability and challenges, but with your friends who have similar perspectives, it's valuable. And I'm part of a few different communities that are sharing and supporting each other. And the other piece is just, I feel very fortunate to have a great management team at Calm. We're all in this boat together. It is a very high EQ, very, very thoughtful team that are very supportive of each other. And finally, we have a rare situation in Calm where we have co-CEOs. My buddy Alex Chu and I set the company up together. So we definitely have some kind of very valuable, important kind of sessions together where we're talking about things we're both sort of grappling with. And I think that's been invaluable.
Nice. True concept of dual leadership there.
Yes.
Yeah. So
I wouldn't recommend it to all companies, but it works. It works at Calm.
Yeah, it's done. I've read a bit about it. In Brazil, they do it quite a lot for mixed reasons. Yeah. So I was doing a bit of research on it about a year ago. So yeah. Wow. So last question, and it's a quick one, but there's a bit of research out there looking at kind of the impact of where we are right now and looking at nostalgia and us experiencing the sense of nostalgia for kind of the life we used to have. And there's some studies that are looking at actually to help get you in a better state of mental fitness. It can actually be helpful to embrace this concept of almost pre-nostalgia or reverse nostalgia. So thinking about what are the things I'm experiencing right now that I'm going to have nostalgia about in the future. So thinking about your time right now, what is one thing or your favorite thing that you think you're getting the opportunity to do right now that you think you might miss in the future or have nostalgia about?
For me, it's wonderful to be able to spend so much time with my daughter, you know, not whizzing off to work early in the morning and coming back late at night tired. Having all those little touch points throughout the day is great. So that's probably number one. Number two is just having more time to get into flow state when I can close a door or go and just know I won't be interrupted and think about sort of not just what's important today, tomorrow, or next week, but how do we build a company over the next decade or over the next 100 years? And I don't really get time to do that pre-corona. So I think those are two important.
Didier?
I think probably similar on the first one, which is, and the value of the exercise too. It kind of makes you go, you know, are you really taking advantage of it? Because I look at it and I am still, you know, start at 6 or 7, finish 7 or 8, do videos, kind of finish at 10. But it is that there's just so much more incidental contact because you're around each other more and you have those opportunities to, you know, like this afternoon, just help briefly with one of my son was doing a science experiment, so get there and play with that. And there's no way that you can step out of the office, do that and be back in the office. It doesn't work. And so it is actually special all being together. And also because I think everything's been shut down, you weren't going out. There was nowhere to go. So you were all together all the time. And that was actually really awesome because it was just how it was.
Yeah. Thank you.
Feeling nostalgic already.
It's a nice exercise, I find. So thank you. So thanks so much for both of you for being so open and sharing your personal experiences and also sharing your thoughts around, I guess, well-being and emotional intelligence in the workplace. It's refreshing to see perspectives of two CEOs or co-CEOs and co-founders who, I guess, are not only putting culture first, but genuinely care about the well-being of their employees and their teams. And I can definitely see it's a key contributing factor to both of your businesses. So for those who haven't already, download the Calm app and take a look around. And as we spoke about earlier, in order to gauge where well-being is in your organization, sometimes it does to start with a survey. And thank you so much, Michael and Didier.
Thanks.
Great.
Chloe.
Thank you.
Michael.
No worries.
Cheers,
See you later.
Chloe.
Right.